Today we're going to be talking about Section 4, which deals with the historical and artistic traditions of West African cultures. First and foremost, the key thing I want to make sure that you all understand is that many of the historical facts, information, legends, myths, religious beliefs, all of it was pretty much passed down through what we call oral tradition, which means they speak it. One generation memorizes it and then passes it on to another. The individuals who do this in West African society were the griots, and there are still plenty of griots out there that keep this tradition alive. They memorize the stories of their people. This can be historical. This can range from historical information, lines of kings, stories around that, to epic poems and songs. Griots preserve and maintain a great deal of information. However, oral tradition always is susceptible to flaw, typically because we'll just think about learning history and trying to remember all of that information. Now, even for someone like me who is pretty good at remembering information and has been studying history for a long time, sometimes I still get information and facts mixed up. And I'm sure if you've ever gotten to a test and been like, gosh, I can't remember the name of so-and-so, or you get someone's name mixed up with someone else, you know how easy it is to misremember information. And griots don't have historical texts to refer back to for a lot of this. And so sometimes over time, information gets skewed, mixed up, confused, names get switched, things like that. So oral tradition helped, but it's not perfect, of course. That said, griots are highly respected in their society. They kept traditions and tales alive. They serve a very important purpose because West African civilizations really didn't develop written languages. Later on, Arabic ends up being pretty much the only written language that they used. And up until that point, have to depend on griots. And even after that, there's a lot that's not written down. That's still just oral tradition. Griots also recite proverbs. They teach lessons. They memorize hundreds of names and events. That's their entire life is dedicated to preserving the history of their people. There are also some epic poems that they would memorize, two of which you need to be vaguely familiar with. One called the Dansi, which is the story of Ghana. It includes both historical events and is mixed with myth and legend. And then Sundiata, which is about the first king of Mali, Sundiata, and is what a lot of the information we have on him is based off of. We will watch that, and we're going to watch it now. Okay, so the video I'm about to show you is an actual griot. He is a musician, griot, and he'll tell you in the video. A griot can be both a storyteller, or a griot can be a musician like he is, and it's a fascinating tradition, and he's an excellent musician. So, pay close attention. Please watch the video. Now, this section is focused heavily on the arts in West Africa, especially because with West Africa having so many different tribal groups throughout the years, and each having their own forms of art, music, and dance that may have been inspired or connected to one another, but are also unique to each group. It's very rich in cultural art and music and forms of dance. And so we want to make sure that we have a at least base understanding of forms of artistic expression in West Africa. They value the arts in particularly, and they express themselves creatively through several different methods. Sculpture. Sculptors were particularly revered because sculptures can be used in religious ceremonies. They can be dedicated to gods. They can be often depictions of ancestors or great kings, and so sculptors would receive a lot of respect in West African society. They made masks out of mostly out of wood that you've probably seen before. I'll show you a picture in a minute. They're relatively well known and recognizable. They made cloth called kente, and other kinds of cloth too, but that's the main one that we're talking about that was bright and beautiful and worn by royalty most of the time. And then they also played a lot of unique music, dance that is still practiced more or less in many parts of Africa. These are just some examples of sculptures. The art style varies from group to group. This one down here, I believe, are the bronze statues from the city of Benin, which there is a couple of readings actually, in a Q&A called Q&A Readings on the Lost City of Benin that we were to start last week. Got a little off track with the spring fling happening on Friday, and which I have moved and extended into this week because it's really important. The city of Benin was destroyed in 1897 by the British. And typically speaking, European powers did not. Britain was very fond of colonizing, and also they didn't have any issues with taking cultural artifacts from places that they colonized or took over. And in 1897, they burned down the palace of Benin's king and stole a large number of bronze statues like these. They'd been in a lot of them were sold off and some were housed in a museum in London. And they only recently began returning those. But they're great works of art, which was really significant. It also challenged a lot of ideas that Europeans would have had about people living in Africa at the time. Most Europeans shared a belief in the 1800s and probably into the 1900s too, that African civilizations were not technically equipped or capable of creating art of this. Yes, it's absolutely a racist concept. And it was very common throughout Europe. And so they see these statues, these bronze busts of kings and others, and it starts to call into question a lot of the common beliefs concerning race and other cultures that Europeans, particularly in Great Britain, had. After all, they can justify taking over other places if they convince themselves that the people in that place are somehow not as capable as they are. They need the British Empire to rule over them. That you're not destroying their history because they don't really have history. And then we know, of course, that that's bogus, but people typically believed that. And so the revelation that not only are they able to produce great works of art, intricate, beautiful statues like this, starts to get people thinking like maybe we're wrong. Some of our ideas are not accurate. The British Empire throughout the 1900s starts, losing or giving up lots of the territory that they used to have. And that's partially because of a shift in the way that they thought. And that's important. My screen's gone blank. Okay. This video is going to deal with the issue of Western or European reactions to the Benin bronzes. And it is going to touch on the topic of racism, which is a big part of European history. And so this will discuss the ways in which the revelation of the Benin bronzes does have an impact on both Great Britain and other Western societies as well. So please pay close attention. So, masks. The masks seen to the left of the screen are based on traditional African masks, typically made out of and carved out of wood, then painted. They usually bear the faces of hyenas, monkeys, lions, other animals. They would be worn in dances and ceremonies, religious and otherwise. And these played a large part in West African cultures, in some particular West African cultures. Other societies are more famous for weaving particular cloth, like the kente cloth, which I wanted to show you some pictures of what that would look like. You've probably seen designs like this before. Very bright colors, typically in strips of cloth. These would have been worn most often by African royalty and is still heavily associated with African societies today, particularly West African societies. As far as music and dance goes, both are extremely important forms of visual art that would have been and are still observed today in West African societies. They're also forms of entertainment. They help people honor their history. They mark special occasions. They perform dances at weddings and other ceremonies like funerals. And there are some groups that are still performing traditional dances very similar to the ones that were performed by their ancestors. These are just some shots of some different groups. Different tribal groups will have different traditions. Some people sort of want to lump together all of these people living in West Africa, and yet they may have things in common, but they also have their own unique cultural practices, dances, music, stories, religious beliefs. So they're really quite diverse. And this is actually just a resource on different kinds of African dances. And I'm going to show you a video of some traditional dances in just a moment. This is actually where I am stopping the recording. That's more or less the end of the lecture. Does anyone have any questions before we move on to watching some of these dances? All right. In that case, I am stopping this. If you are watching this as a recording, feel free to go back into the student-paced version of the Nearpod and explore any of these videos or resources for yourself.